The notification came at 6:47 in the morning while I was still in my scrubs from the overnight shift, a message from the bank. Not my bank, my sister's bank. But my name was on the account, because 6 months ago I had co-signed her business loan and apparently that meant I got CC'd on everything now. I almost swiped it away. I had 12 hours on my feet behind me and all I wanted was to get home, feed my cat, and sleep until Thursday. But something made me stop. I read it twice standing in the hospital parking lot, the October wind cutting right through my jacket, and then I sat down on the curb because my legs stopped working properly. The payment had bounced, again, the third time in 4 months. I knew what that meant. I had known for a while, if I'm being honest. I just hadn't let myself say it out loud yet. My sister's name is Renee. She's 4 years younger than me, which makes her 28, and she has always been the kind of person who makes you feel like the sun came out when she walked into the room. I'm not being poetic. That's genuinely what it was like growing up with her. She laughed easily, she remembered everyone's birthdays, she cried at commercials for animal shelters. Our mother used to say that Renee came into the world soft, and the world hadn't managed to harden her yet. I am not soft. I came out of nursing school at 23 with student loans, and a very clear understanding that nothing was going to be handed to me. I picked up extra shifts. I said no to things I wanted so I could build my savings account into something that actually felt like a cushion. I had a plan for every year of my life mapped out in a spreadsheet that my coworker Tamsin called aggressively responsible, and I called not wanting to be broke at 40. Renee did not have a spreadsheet. What she had was a dream, and the dream was a bakery. To be fair, she was talented. I mean genuinely talented, not in the way that people say when they're being kind, but in the way where strangers would eat her lemon tarts at a dinner party and then corner her in the kitchen for 20 minutes asking where she trained. She had taken professional pastry courses. She had staged at a place in Toronto for a year. She had done her research. The dream was not completely crazy. What was maybe slightly crazy was Marcus. She met him 2 years before the bakery idea fully took shape, and he arrived in her life the way a lot of problems arrive, gradually, and then all at once. I did not dislike Marcus immediately. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, which is to say, he was good at making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room, right up until the moment you weren't. He had a lot of opinions about business and finance that he delivered with the confidence of someone who had never actually run a business or managed his own finances particularly well. But Renee loved him, and he made her happy, or at least he made her look happy, and at the time I thought maybe I was being too cautious, too analytical, reading into things that weren't there. I was not reading into things. The bakery idea became the bakery plan the winter after they got engaged. They had found a space in a neighborhood just east of downtown, a narrow storefront with a commercial kitchen in the back that had previously been a cafe. The previous owner had left in a hurry and the equipment was still there. The rent was manageable, at least on paper. They had a name picked out, a logo designed, an Instagram account with 300 followers and 0 posts. What they did not have was the money for the startup costs. The equipment needed servicing. The space needed renovations. They needed inventory, packaging, a POS system, insurance, licensing fees, a working capital buffer for the first few months before revenue started coming in. Marcus had put together a number. The number was $85,000. I found out they needed my help on a Sunday afternoon in November. Renee called and asked if she could come over, which she never did without at least a week's notice, and I knew from the way she asked that something was happening. She sat at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and she explained everything very carefully in the way you explain something when you've rehearsed it. Marcus had looked into small business loans. Their credit wasn't strong enough on their own. Marcus had a judgment on his credit file from a few years back. Some dispute with a landlord that he said was resolved, but apparently wasn't resolved enough for the bank, and Renee had no credit history to speak of because she had always just used a debit card for everything. They needed a cosigner, someone with stable income, good credit, and a long employment history. I know it's a lot to ask, she said. She wasn't looking at me. It was a lot to ask. I told her I needed to think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to my bank. I talked to a financial advisor I had seen twice before. I pulled together everything I could find about the bakery's projected revenue and read it carefully and then read it again. I asked Marcus to send me his business plan, which he did, though it took him 9 days, and when it arrived it was 12 pages long and 4 of those pages were mood boards. Here is what I told myself. Renee is careful. Renee is hardworking. The concept is solid. The location is good. The equipment is already there. The loan is structured so that payments come from the business account, not from me directly. I am a cosigner, which means I'm a backup, not the primary borrower. If the business does well, and there's a real chance it does well, I will never have to think about this again. Here is what I did not tell myself, because I was not ready to hear it. You are not co-signing for the bakery. You are co-signing for Marcus. And Marcus is a different kind of risk entirely. I signed the papers in January. The bakery opened in March. The opening weekend was genuinely beautiful. The space looked warm and exactly right, all white tiles and pale wood, and the smell of something caramelized and buttery drifting out the front door. There was a lineup down the block on Saturday morning. My coworkers came. My mother would have been so proud. I went every Sunday for the first 2 months. I bought croissants I didn't need and sat at the little table by the window and watched Renee move through the space like she had been built for it. She was happy in a way that was different from the performing happiness I had started to recognize in her face when Marcus was around. In the kitchen, she was just herself. Easy, certain. And then things started to shift. It started small. Marcus had decided he was the front of house manager, which seemed fine in theory, but in practice meant he came in at 10, left at 3, and spent most of the in-between time on his phone. He had opinions about the social media strategy that conflicted with what was actually working. He started bringing in a friend, a guy named whoever, I never bothered to learn his name, to help with operations, which as far as I could tell meant standing near the register and eating day-old pastries. The prices came next. Marcus wanted to expand the menu, more savory items, a lunch service, weekend brunch, all of which cost money to develop and launch and staff for, money that the business did not yet have because it had been open for 11 weeks. Renee told me about the expansion plans with the careful voice she used when she was repeating something she had been told to say. It's a growth investment, she said. Where's the money coming from? I asked. Marcus thinks we can put it on the business line of credit. I asked to see the financials. Marcus told Renee to tell me that the financials were being compiled and he'd have them to me soon. That was in May. By June, the business line of credit was at its limit. I want to be precise about what happened on the August long weekend, because some of it is still a little blurry in places, and some of it I remember with the kind of clarity that means my brain decided it was important. Marcus had called me the Wednesday before the long weekend. He was friendly on the phone, which already felt like a warning sign because Marcus was not typically friendly with me. He said he wanted to sit down with me at the bakery to walk through some numbers, and could I come Saturday morning before they opened? I drove over at 8. The street was quiet. Marcus was already there, standing behind the counter, and he had his laptop open and a coffee poured, and for about 4 minutes I thought maybe this was going to be a real conversation. It was not. What he wanted was for me to take out a personal line of credit, my personal line of credit secured against my condo, and transfer $30,000 into the business account. He had already looked up what I could qualify for, which I found out later because he had asked Renee to show him my mortgage documents. He had a number ready. He had a reason for the number. He had an answer for every question I asked, all of them delivered in the tone of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. I said no. I said it clearly and without a lot of explanation, because I had learned from experience that with Marcus, more explanation meant more surface area for argument. He did not take it well. I won't reconstruct the whole thing because parts of it are still embarrassing to think about, not because of anything I did, but because of how quickly a person can reveal themselves when they don't get what they want. He said I was sabotaging Renee's dream. He said I was jealous of her success. He used the word sabotage 3 times. He told me that my name on that loan meant I had a responsibility to protect the business, which is not how co-signing works, and when I said that, he took a step toward me. Not a threatening step, technically. He didn't touch me, but he was a tall man and he used his height in that moment in a way that was deliberate, and I took a step back, and my heel caught on the edge of the rubber floor mat behind the counter, and I went down hard. My left wrist took the impact. I heard something before I felt it. Marcus looked at me on the floor. He said, "You're so dramatic." Then he walked into the back kitchen. I drove myself to the urgent care clinic in Scarborough with my left arm in my lap and tears running down my face that I was furious at myself for shedding. The x-ray showed a fracture of the distal radius. They put me in a cast that went from my palm to my elbow. I was told I could not work for 6 to 8 weeks. I am a nurse. My hands are how I do my job. Renee texted me 3 hours later when I was sitting in the clinic waiting for my discharge paperwork. The text said, "Marcus told me what happened. You know how he gets when he's stressed. Can we just not make this a whole thing?" I stared at it for a long time. I didn't answer. My friend Deepa picked me up from the clinic because I couldn't drive with one hand and I hadn't wanted to call anyone until I knew what I was dealing with. She sat in the parking lot with me for 20 minutes while I told her everything, and she did not say, "I told you so," even though she had, in fact, told me so approximately 17 months earlier, at a dinner where Marcus had explained to her husband, who is an actual accountant, how compound interest works. She drove me home. She made me eat something. She fed my cat, whose name is Harold and who sat on my cast for the entire evening with the specific calm of an animal who knows something bad has happened and has decided his job is to be a warm weight. I had 6 weeks of medical leave ahead of me and a fracture in my wrist and a sister who had just texted me asking me not to make things a whole thing. And I sat in my apartment and I thought about what I wanted to do. I thought about my mother. She died 4 years ago, a stroke, very sudden, and the last real conversation I had with her was about Renee, about how she worried that Renee trusted too easily and needed someone to look out for her. I had taken that seriously. I had taken it maybe too seriously. I had made it mean that I was supposed to absorb whatever came from Renee's life, including Marcus, including the decisions Marcus made that Renee went along with because she loved him and she wanted this to work. But my mother had never met Marcus, and I don't think she would have meant it this way. I called a lawyer the following Monday, not a family lawyer, a commercial lawyer, someone who handled business agreements. I explained the situation. I asked what my options were as a co-signer. The answer was cleaner than I expected. Here's something most people don't know about co-signing a business loan: if there is a material change in the business's financial position, or if the primary borrower defaults on terms, including the terms about keeping the co-signer informed of financial changes, which was buried in Clause 14b of the loan agreement and which Marcus had almost certainly never read. The co-signer can petition the lender to review the co-signing arrangement. It doesn't always work, but in cases where the co-signer can demonstrate financial risk and document a deteriorating repayment history, the bank has an incentive to restructure. The business had missed 3 payments. I had the bank notifications. I had my own documentation of the requests I'd made for financials that had never been provided. I had the medical report from the urgent care clinic with the date and the mechanism of injury and the attending physician's notes. I did not report Marcus to the police. I want to be honest about why. I thought about it, and then I thought about Renee, and I made a choice that I might make differently now. What I did instead was call the bank's commercial lending department and request a formal review. It took 4 weeks. 4 weeks during which Renee called me twice, both times with Marcus's voice audible in the background. The first call, she asked me to withdraw the review request. The second call, she told me I was destroying her life. I listened to both calls. I said I was sorry she was going through this. I did not withdraw the request. On the second Wednesday of October, the bank called me to inform me that the co-signing arrangement had been formally restructured. Effectively, they were treating the loan as if it had no eligible co-signer, which meant it was being called due for renegotiation. The business did not have the credit standing to renegotiate without a co-signer. The loan went into default. The bakery closed on a Friday. They lost the equipment, which had been used as collateral. They lost the deposits they had put down on a second location that Marcus had been negotiating without telling Renee, apparently, until after it fell through. The number I heard later, from a mutual friend who still talked to both of us, was somewhere around $40,000 in total losses beyond the equipment. Marcus left Renee 3 weeks after the bakery closed. He moved in with someone else before December. I went back to work in November when my cast came off, lighter than expected, a little strange on my wrist. The bone healed, but the muscles still rebuilding. My first shift back, I cried in the break room for about 4 minutes, which Tamsin witnessed and responded to by handing me a coffee and not asking any questions, which is exactly the right response and why I have worked beside her for 6 years. Renee and I did not speak for 4 months. I won't pretend that was easy. I missed her the way you miss a part of yourself you've had to set down for a while. I sent her a card at Christmas with nothing in it except my phone number written at the bottom, which she already had, but I wanted her to know the line was open. She called in February. It was a long call. Parts of it were hard. She said things that were true and things that were not completely fair, and I let most of it sit without arguing, because she needed to say them more than I needed to rebut them. At the end of it, she asked me if I was still angry. I told her I wasn't angry. That was true. What I was, and what I explained as carefully as I could, was finished. Finished with carrying things that weren't mine to carry. Finished with making myself smaller so other people's bad decisions had room to breathe. I had loved her, all her life. I would keep loving her. But the shape of what I could offer had changed, and I was not going to pretend otherwise to make the conversation easier. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Mom would have hated Marcus." I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it came out before I could stop it. This genuine laugh that felt like something loosening in my chest. "Yeah," I said, "she really would have." This is the part I keep coming back to, the part that feels important to say out loud. I did not save my sister. I did not fix her life or protect her from the consequences of choices she made alongside someone who was not good for her. For a long time, I thought that was my job. The older one, the responsible one, the one with the spreadsheet and the plan. I thought protecting her meant absorbing whatever came. It doesn't mean that. I know that now. What protecting someone means, I think, is being honest with them even when it costs you something. Not co-signing things you know are wrong because you can't stand to disappoint them. Not pretending that a man who used his height to make you step backward and then called you dramatic has nothing to answer for. Not making yourself smaller in the hope that it creates more room for the people you love. My wrist still aches when the weather changes. I am told this might always be the case. Deba and her husband came over for dinner last month, and Deba brought wine and Harold sat on the husband's lap, and I made pasta from scratch because I finally could again. Both hands working, nothing held back. It was a regular evening. Nothing dramatic about it. I thought about Renee while I was cooking. I hoped she was okay. I think she will be. The soft people, the ones who came into the world like that, they usually find their way back. It just takes them longer sometimes. I did not hope she would call. I did not sit by the phone. I ate dinner with my friends and I washed the dishes after, and I went to bed at a reasonable hour, like a person who has done the thing they needed to do and can now, finally, rest. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually costs to be the responsible one. Not in money. Though that part was real enough, and my wrist still reminds me every time the temperature drops below zero. I mean the other cost. The invisible one. The way you quietly shrink yourself down, year after year, so that the people you love don't have to feel the weight of their own decisions. I did that for a long time. I told myself it was love. Maybe some of it was, but some of it was also fear. Fear of being the one who said no, the one who made things hard, the one who let people down. I had built an entire identity around being useful, and somewhere along the way I confused being useful with being used. Marcus didn't fracture my wrist because he was a monster. He did it because he had learned over time that pressure worked, that if he pushed hard enough, metaphorically and then literally, people moved. Renee had moved. I had moved. The bank had moved. For a while. People like Marcus don't calculate these things consciously. They just keep applying force until something gives, and then they call you dramatic when it does. What I had to understand, and what took me longer than I'd like to admit, is that the moment I signed that loan, I had already started giving. Not because the loan was wrong necessarily, but because I had signed it while knowing things I wasn't letting myself say. I knew the business plan was thin. I knew Marcus would treat my name on that document as permission to treat my resources the same way. I signed anyway because Renee looked at me across my kitchen table with hope in her face, and I could not stand to be the reason that hope went out. That's not love protecting someone. That's fear dressed up as love. And the difference matters because fear as love never actually protects anyone. It just delays the reckoning and makes it worse when it arrives. The hard truth about what happened is that the bakery was always going to fail. Not because Renee wasn't talented, she was, genuinely, but because a business can't survive being run by someone who treats other people's boundaries as obstacles to root around. Marcus would have found another way to exhaust the line of credit, another expansion plan, another person to pressure into carrying what he wouldn't carry himself. The only question was how much I was going to absorb before I stopped. I stopped when I was sitting in an urgent care clinic in Scarborough with a fractured wrist and a text from my sister asking me not to make things difficult. That was the moment I understood that I had been confusing loyalty with self-erasure. Real loyalty, the kind worth keeping, doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't ask you to stay quiet about a man who used his size to make you step backward and then walked away while you were on the floor. It doesn't ask you to keep your name on a document that was being used as a weapon against you. Withdrawing that co-signature was the most honest thing I did in that entire relationship. Not because it punished anyone. I wasn't thinking about punishment. I was thinking about what was true and what I was actually able to stand behind. And the answer was, not this. Not this. Not anymore. Renee called me in February, and it was hard, and it was also the first real conversation we'd had in years. That's what I keep coming back to. The boundary didn't end the relationship. The pretending had been ending it all along, slowly, the way water finds cracks in concrete. Quietly, and then all at once. I don't know that I'd call any of this a lesson, exactly. It feels too lived in for that word. But if I had to say something, it would be this. The most important thing I ever did for my sister was stop protecting her from the consequences of her choices. And the most important thing I ever did for myself was learn the difference between love and the performance of it. My wrist aches when it rains. Harold still sits on it anyway. Some things you just carry forward, you just carry them differently.